Today we're going to tackle two chapters, chapter 2 and chapter 3. So let's go ahead and get started. Ways of understanding and perceiving self and others. That's chapter 2. The other one has to do with ethics. Okay. There we go. I have no idea why I have McLovin, a picture of McLovin on this. I haven't really seen McLovin, or I'm not exactly sure. I haven't seen McLovin lately, but he was quite a character. Practitioners must realize that each person constructs reality in their own unique way. This is called constructivism. Constructivism focuses on how individuals describe their experiences in terms of personal constructs. And we can talk about the same thing and we can be looking at the same thing, but potentially our realities are not the same. A personal construct is an explanation of an event or series of events that becomes the lens through which the individual sees the world. These constructs are developed as individuals interpret and give meaning to their experiences. Constructs are not consciously developed. And of course, if you've ever taken a ride on a dromedary, I think it's a dromedary, it looks like a one-humped camel, very different. So I'm guessing these ladies are in Egypt or someplace over there. Of course, they have camels all over the place in the Middle East. So potentially, of course, their worldview, their construct of reality may be totally different from somebody who's never been to Egypt or to the wherever that is, northern Africa. Social constructivists focus on how relationships, language, and context influence an individual's or a group's interpretation of self, others, and the world. And of course, this is a picture of French soldiers during World War I. I'm sure their interpretation of self, others, and the world was very different as the high explosives started raining down on their heads. They probably got a different view of the world. Personality is the individual's distinctive qualities, traits, characteristics, behavior patterns. Personality is a socially constructed idea. So without society, we would potentially have no personalities at all. We wouldn't have to act in a certain way. But because we live in societies, we have to act in a way so that we can be socially acceptable. That's why it's done. And here, this lady is constructing her personality from her social understanding. People that go to, well, if you've ever seen the movie, what is that movie? Crocodile Dundee, about the Australian guy going to visit his girlfriend. I guess she becomes his girlfriend. Anyway, he goes to New York with her from Australia. And one of the things he notices is that people in New York don't smile very much. And of course, that's part of their society. That's part of their personality. If you smile, people might potentially take advantage of you. So city people, maybe even Phoenix and Tucson and maybe Flagstaff, maybe if you're walking down the street and you smile at somebody, they won't smile back at you. And that may have something to do with their social construct. Their personality. It changes your personality. Some of our strongest personality constructs are developed in childhood. These constructs tend to be harder to change because they're based on immature feelings and possibly illogical thoughts, and are established by the undeveloped mind as truths. And of course, one example would be child abuse. If you grow up thinking that this is the way the world is and this is the way it's supposed to be, it's really hard to change all that. And this is one of the reasons why Freud came up with his theories, because A lot of the ideas about sex come from when you're going through puberty or before you go through puberty. All of these things impact who you are. And of course, if something happened to you, if you were sexually molested when you were relatively young, then that becomes stuck. And the reason that information becomes stuck is because you have an undeveloped mind and you can't get rid of it because you think this is a world truth. So that's one of the reasons why, as a counselor, sometimes you're going to have to talk about what happened to somebody when they were young and how it has influenced them in their adult or adolescent mind. Mother, my child is intelligent, handsome, and funny. The child thinks, yep, that's got to be true. I must be both intelligent, handsome, and funny. Father, he is too awkward to play sports. Son, that must be true. I am bad at sports. Therefore, I will not participate. Mother, no one will love you unless you are thin and beautiful. Daughter, true. I must lose weight and wear lots of makeup to cover my many flaws. And of course, this is the Joker. And he's got lots of makeup on, that's for sure. Parents, people not like us can't be trusted. Children, true. People who are different are dangerous. And of course, if that's what your parents told you, then that's what you think. This is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to get rid of prejudice, these ideas. And some people, you can tell them and tell them and tell them that this isn't true, this isn't true. This idea, this bias you have against this group or the other. But the reality is that individual will keep that idea for an extended length of time. This is one of the reasons why racial prejudice is so difficult to get rid of. If you look at how I was raised back in the 50s and 60s, I was lucky that in my house they treated everybody the same, or they talked about everybody as if they were the same. But there are a lot of people that I grew up around who their parents were telling them that you can't cross black people, that you shouldn't have anything to do with Mexican Americans or Mexicans, actually. I grew up in Indiana, and there were people that planted that had tomato fields and pepper fields, green pepper fields, and the migrant workers would come up from Texas every year, and they would pick fruit. They would pick vegetables, I guess. Tomatoes, it turns out to be a fruit, but we won't go into that. Anyway, and sometimes they would stay. Trini Lopez, who was a singer from the 60s, was actually born in Indiana. He's not only born in Indiana, but he's raised in Indiana. His parents had been migrant workers. They were picking something, tomatoes or peppers, one season, and the mother gave birth to Trini, and they decided somebody offered them a job, and they decided to stay. We had Mexican Americans in my grade school and my high school. Well, not my high school. I guess they weren't there by the time we were in high school, but they were there in grade school, and it was really kind of interesting. Um, you know, personally, I didn't think anything about them. I didn't even recognize them as being different. But there were people that said negative things about them around me that were in my class, and I would listen to them and just kind of shake my head and wonder, where did you come up with that? And that's why. Parent, you are worthless and will never amount to anything. Children, true, why even try? And of course, this is a homeless lady with dreadlocks. That's pretty interesting for a white person. I guess you have to do something to your hair to make your hair grow like that. Culture strongly influences words used to describe someone's personality, and this is one of the reasons why we argue about words. Minority cultures will sometimes accept the dominant culture's view of themselves as true, and thus that definition to evaluate themselves. And this always irritates me if you live up to your negative stereotype, or if you act like your negative stereotype. That just really irritates me that you would let these other people define you. I think you need to define yourself no matter who you are and no matter what the situation is. The constructivist perspective helps practitioners remember that their views of the world may be different from their client's view. The practitioner needs to remember to work within the client's view of reality. And the reason I put Jersey Shore up here, all of these individuals, is because the people on Jersey Shore, if I remember correctly, they were working in a tanning salon, and this was in New Jersey, and they were working in it. I think they were all the females were working in a tanning salon, and most of the males were bodybuilders, or at least lifted weights to some extent. The situation is the only one I remember. This is Snooki, and I don't remember any of the others. I never really watched the show. I just kind of got little pieces of it from time to time. Snooki is interesting. Is actually Peruvian. She was a from the indigenous peoples of Peru. She's only about 4'8". Really kind of curious. My mother was 4'8", and that's one of the reasons why I care about Snooki. Anyway, so the reason I put this here, so here they are. What am I talking about? If you ever watch that show, their view of the world, who you were supposed to be, what you were supposed to be doing. They tried to act like each other. They worked in a superficial place like the tanning salon, which everybody wants to be look tanned. Is a an idea that society tells you that you're supposed to look a certain way. Of course, they were all Italian, not Snooki, of course, but the rest of them I think were supposed to be Italian, if I remember. Anyway, we need to remember that if we're dealing with somebody who is kind of superficial, and that's what I saw. The people of Jersey Shore, they were fairly superficial. It was how you looked, not who you were. It really didn't matter what you did. It was the fact that you looked good and that you acted a certain way. Anyway, that is their reality. When an individual, family, or group becomes aware of a construct that is unsatisfying or limiting, the individual can develop another meaning for events or experiences and begin to realize change is possible. If you grow up in an alcoholic family and you see one of your relatives being arrested, or you see one of your relatives being having overdosing and almost dying, you see that you've got to change reality. Your reality, this is your reality. It's always been your reality. Now, possibly, in order for you to survive, you're going to have to reject that idea that this is the way to be. So you can change. There's got to be a possibility of change. But the idea is better if it comes from the client. And of course, it's got to be the client that tells them this. It's easy for me to say, hey, look, I've never been drunk in my life, which isn't quite true. I've been drunk 3 times. But I've never been drunk in my life, and you need to stop getting drunk every weekend. It's easy for me to say. It has to be the client that says, I'm going to stop drinking and getting that drunk every weekend. And probably they'll say, I'm going to slow down. I can still drink, but I'm not going to get drunk. And of course, they'll slip from time to time. And then you will try to convince them that they need to be abstinent. But it's a habit, this drinking to the point of inebriation. It becomes a habit. Of course, sometimes a practitioner will have to work with pair bond structures that have very different individual constructs. A husband may believe that a wife should stay home and raise the children, while his wife might think that she should be able to go out and work. And of course, this was a huge argument when I first started in psychology. I started psychology in the 1970s. In the 1950s and 1960s, it was rare for women to go out and work. It was a very small percentage of the population in the United States. Most women, most husbands worked, and most women stayed home. And if he didn't make enough money, they just did without. And that was fine. And that was the way it was. I have a sister that wanted this to happen. She graduated from high school, and I come from a family of academics, okay? But I have a sister that didn't want to work. She wanted to stay home and raise her babies and take care of her dogs. She always wanted a dog. She was going to have this dog and that dog. She's going to have a Saint Bernard. She was going to have a boxer. She was going to have a Doberman. You know, she's going to have all of these dogs. Really kind of a weird kid. So my parents, of course, my mother was a nurse. My dad was a banker, and he very much believed in education. So he tried to send her. They tried to send her to school, and she agreed. Yes, I will go to school. But she agreed that she would go to stewardess school. She wanted to go to stewardess school in Kansas City. So she went through the program, and of course, my she has a pretty high IQ. So she's smart enough to do this stuff. She's just lazy, academically lazy. Let me say that. She graduated from this thing with high honors. So here she is. Theoretically, she's looking for a job as a stewardess. She graduated from high school in 66. So this was 67, 68. So she goes to Chicago to find a job. And of course, O'Hare Airport wasn't built then. It was Midway. Anyway, she goes to see my uncle has connections in Chicago. So they were trying to find her the perfect stewardess job for her. And she started going to the clubs in Chicago, and she met a guy, and she got pregnant, of course. And the rest is history. She never, ever worked as a stewardess. She never planned to work as a stewardess. She has a certificate. I'm not exactly sure what stewardesses. They're not stewardesses anymore. They're something else. Anyway, she never planned to go. But this was the argument in the 60s and 70s. And like I said, the vast majority of women did not work outside the home. They were homemakers. They took care of the children, and that was thought that was their job. So if you read my sister's yearbook, and it says, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" All of these, all the females in the class, they said, "I want to get married and have babies. I want to be a homemaker." That kind of stuff. It was really kind of interesting. They had no desire to do anything outside of staying at home and raising the kids and calling their friends up on the telephone, just like they were in high school, as weird as that is. I guess it's not that weird. But anyway, that was the argument when I was going to college, when I was going to graduate school to get my first degree in psychology. That was the argument. And it was massive. It was huge. There were portions of the people in the United States that were screaming that if we allowed women to in the workplace, then there would be a lot of sexual harassment, which was true. But the children wouldn't have anybody taking care of them, and it would just be a tragic mess. So the women who decided to become professionals and to raise their children in childcare, they were watching very, very carefully to see how the children turned out, as weird as that is. I guess it's not that weird. That was the argument, and that was the number one argument in psychology in the 1970s, because we were still arguing about this. It wasn't until the late 1980s and early 1990s that women actually moved out of the home and started working outside. My mother, when I was going to school, my mother was the only person that was working. I, I was, we came from the only family where the mother actually worked. My dad was a banker, my mother was a nurse, and she actually worked. And of course, the women of our small village, they were just appalled that my mother was working. But of course, that didn't keep them from, if their kid fell out of a tree, that didn't keep them from bringing the kid over so my mother could take care of them. She was the unofficial doctor, and of course, she would stabilize them and then they transport them someplace. But that's the way it works. Systems theory takes into account the entire system with which an individual interacts. A system is seen as a complex entity within which interactions are as important as the individual. Rules are established by the family to teach what is expected or permitted by individual family members. The rules help regulate and stabilize how families function as a unit. We're looking at, this is a Hispanic family, and we're looking at the food. I'm guessing that either this woman or this woman made the food. The father's allowed to pour drinks, pour the juice, but he would not be allowed to cook. That's a fairly traditional way of looking at things. Not sure what that is. I won't even speculate, but every family has their rules. Mom cooks, dad works, comes home, unbuttons his pants and sits in front of the television and drinks a beer. Everybody has their own rules. Changing one part of the family system will result in changes to other parts. If something in the family dynamic changes, like a wife getting a job to help with the family finances, the homework distribution will have to change to even out labor. And of course, this happened in my own family. My mother didn't work the entire time I was growing up. She didn't start working until my brother was in kindergarten. My youngest brother was in kindergarten, and he was born in 54. So he was in kindergarten in 59. And of course, I was born in 49, so I was 10 years old when my mother went back to work. So everything changed when my mother went to work because she started working nights. So here she is. She would sleep all day while we were all at school. And then when we came home, of course, she would do whatever she needed to do. She'd fix supper, and then she would go off to work. She worked graveyard. I think she worked graveyard. Yeah, she worked graveyard. So she slept all day, and she'd get up and she'd take care of us. She'd cook supper, and then she would she'd go to work. I'm laughing because sometimes she didn't get up and make supper, so somebody else had to do it. One of my sisters did it. I came from it's not that traditional of a family, but one of my sisters would cook, or my dad would cook, or I wasn't taught how to cook, but I certainly needed to because I became a single parent when I was how old was I? 22, 23 years old. Family systems may open or closed in various degrees, may be open or closed in various degrees. In closed family systems, the family exists in relative isolation, with communication taking place primarily between the members. Change is avoided, members hold on to established traditions and values, and this was really kind of interesting. If I visited a friend, you never knew what you were walking into. What kind of a row you were causing by saying this or that or the other. My family did things one way, other people's families did things other ways. Most of the people that I lived around when I was growing up were either farmers or the fathers were factory workers. And of course, factory workers, they are centered around the father going to work and then the father coming home and being taken care of. That was fairly common back then. Characteristics of open family systems: willingness to assimilate new information and to engage in ongoing interactions with their environment. The family has no single correct way of doing things. As the family matures, changes are tolerated, supported, and celebrated. And of course, My family was more open. The only closed aspect to my family was the fact we didn't go to church. And most people went to church, and we got talked about a lot because we weren't where we were supposed to be on Sunday mornings. Um, so that aspect was closed. Everything else was fairly liberal. My mother worked, and that was fairly liberal at that time anyway, but we were fairly open to things. We all went to college, and that was really weird back in the 60s and 70s. In the family systems perspective, practitioners gain an understanding of how interactions within the family system affects clients. Family systems assist clients in identifying reciprocal relationships between their behavior and influence of the systems within which they interact. Clients realize both how someone else's behavior is influencing them and how their behavior is influencing others. The ecological perspective views people and their environment as continuously evolving. The ecological perspective is less concerned with cause and effect and more concerned with the transactions that occur between people and their environments. The ecological perspective was derived from the concept of biological ecology. This structure enables practitioners and clients to think about the reciprocal relationship between people and their environment. And of course, this is Tokyo. As you can see, everybody's crossing the street. Uh, it's quite a mess. There are buses. We can see buses. I think that's a bus. Anyway, I've lived in Japan, and I'll tell you, it is crowded. It is really, really crowded. People in their environments. Um, One of the interesting things, if you travel by train in Japan, which is very common, you've got to be ready to be pressed right up against the everybody around you because that's the way it works. And it's really kind of interesting because nobody's looking at each other in their eyes. So if you look at somebody's face, they'll look away from you. So you got all these people and they're standing there and everybody's eyes are shooting off in different directions. Nobody's looking at anybody else. Fascinating. Ecological perspective has three important components. Person environment fit. Person environment fit refers to how well a person's needs, goals, and rights mesh with the social and physical environment. A good example would be me. I grew up on a farm, so when I was in the military, that was not a very good fit. Still, I stuck it out for 12 years. Anytime I could live someplace, I tried to live away from the base, away from. I didn't live in an apartment. Okay, I tried to live away from things because that was the environment that I wanted to fit into. Once I married my current wife, anytime we moved, we tried to move out of the city, out off the base, away from people. And now, of course, I live on this 4 acres in the middle of a cornfield, and I've got apple trees growing, and it's a fairly isolated existence, but it fits me, okay, and it seems to fit my wife. She agreed to do it anyway. She's actually she's her family was military. My family wasn't. My dad was in the army during World War II, but then he got out, and we lived in Muncie, Indiana. I was raised in Muncie, Indiana, on a farm outside of Muncie. So we're just a little bit different. I think she always wanted to live. I don't know. I don't know how happy. She does seem to be happy here. So I'll ask her when she comes home. She's with my grandson right now. Adaptations are the processes people use to sustain or increase the level of fit between themselves and the environment. They adapt. Life stressors are issues that exceed the resources of an individual to deal with them. I guess if she didn't agree with me, she would have left me a long time ago. We've lived closer to civilization than we do now. Montana was pretty isolated. We were actually living in a town in Montana, and she's the one that suggested that we try to move out, and we did. We moved out. We were living in Harlem, which was right next to Fort Belknap. Um, and I don't know if you've ever seen the farms up there, but all the houses are really close to each other. But we were on a larger lot than everybody else's. Ours was a double lot. So we had some yard, which wasn't too bad, wasn't so bad. Everybody else's lot was tiny. I mean, it was like half as big as ours was. Anyway, even in Harlem, we were weirdos. Life stressors are issues that exceed the resources of an individual to deal with them, and of course, that's why we need to do things. In the ecological perspective, behaviors are not seen as dysfunctional or maladaptive. Instead, behavior is viewed as adaptations to improve the fit between the individual and their environment. And as you can see, this guy's taking ducks to market. This is in Vietnam. The reason this person is pulling water with a hoe is because it's monsoon season, and this individual is adapting by not wearing shoes, of course. If they wore shoes, they would ruin the shoes. The strengths and perspective views all people as having strengths. It focuses on assets clients have developed throughout their lives. The strength is defined as any psychological process that enables a person to think and act in order to benefit himself or herself and society. Strengths are often developed when people struggle with difficulties, traumas, oppression, disappointments, and adversity. And the reason I put this picture here is because this is a tree growing over an area that has washed away. And here it is, it's still holding on. That's pretty strong. It's still holding on. Part of its roots have dug into the each wall, and that tree is still standing. Everyone has the capacity to develop new resources, to make positive changes, and to use his or her competencies to solve problems. We all have strengths. No matter how thin our shoulders are, we all have strengths. Strengths perspective invites clients to discover, think about, and figure out how to use their strengths. This is different from traditional counseling because they tend to identify deficits, weaknesses, and problems. And this has to do with positive psychology. In positive psychology, you try to identify positive things about the client. In traditional counseling, you are trying to determine the deficits, the weaknesses, and the problems the individual has, and then you fix them, and that's how you make them better. But in positive psychology, you focus on the positives about the individual and try to get rid of them that way. When working with individuals, families, groups, or organizations, the practitioner looks for their strengths, identifies their resources, and invites them to focus on possibilities for the future. Resilience is the ability to survive and thrive in the face of overwhelming life challenges. Resilience is a dynamic process that is the outcome of positive adaptation in the face of adversity, stress, or risk. This shirt actually says something. That's the first time I've ever noticed that. Okay. Resilience is not a fixed personality trait or an inborn characteristic. No one is either vulnerable or resilient all the time. Resilience is learned behaviors and patterns of adaptation. Resilience depends on the availability of protective factors. Risk factors are any influencing factors that can bring or predict negative outcomes on the functioning and overall development of the individual. They can include biological influences, individual influences, family influences, and community influences. And I talk to my kids about this all the time. I say something like, "We're Bradways, and we do things this way. We don't knuckle under to pressure. We're always solving problems." That's the family influence, which isn't always true. but it's a good thing to talk to your kids about, I guess. Protective factors are any factor that can exert either direct or indirect influences to buffer the negative effects of risk factors. Protective factors include strengths, capabilities, talents, coping skills, resources, and assets. Resilience represents both a process and the outcome of competent functioning. Resilience as an outcome involves the interplay of risk and protective factors. Resilience as an outcome represents the resultant positive functioning and competence developed when facing adversity. And of course, I told you I was a single parent for 5 years, which sounds like a long time. And as it was going on, I thought it was going to go on forever. But I always told my kids, we can handle this. They were, when my wife left, they were 2.5. My daughter was 2.5. My son was 9 months. But as they got older and started understanding what I was saying, I would tell them, we can handle this. We're tough. We've got family that will help us if we need to. The problem was that I was in the military at the time, and I was stationed in Lubbock, Texas. And of course, my family was a whole day away by driving in Muncie, Indiana. And, I, I, I didn't have a choice. I had to do it. I had to. I'd enlisted in the military, so I had to serve out my tour, and I had 2 kids, and I had to take care of them. I didn't have a choice, as far as I could see. I guess I could have asked the military to let me out, but I didn't see that as a necessity. We all flourished, all 3 of us flourished, and then we met some people, and things improved. But you need to face your adversities, thinking that I'm going to survive. If you think otherwise, then you won't survive. It wasn't a lot of fun, but neither of them were poisoned by the food I was cooking. You don't ask them that today. They'll tell you what a bad cook I am. But by golly, they survived. They both grew fairly large. They're both large. They both grew as big as they were supposed to be, I guess. But neither of them were skin and bones. They're both athletes, so I must have given them enough protein to survive. Practitioners using the resilience perspective start with an asset of the relevant factors and then focus on helping clients build on the resilience they have developed. And of course, we all have resilience to some extent. The only people that wouldn't have resilience would be people who were codependent, that didn't ever do anything on their own. And of course, if people are those types of people, then probably they're suffering from other mental illnesses, like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, where they have never been really able to function on their own. Anybody that has lived by themselves, has functioned on their own, they have these factors. They have positive factors that you can call on in certain cases. When my wife first left, I didn't, and I say first left, she kept leaving and coming back and leaving and coming back, but eventually she took off for good. Anyway, I wasn't the best cook in the world, but I started cooking the things that I could cook. We would, and of course, the kids wanted to make sure that they survived. We did things. We took our minds off of things. We watched television. We did whatever. We went out a lot. We went to playgrounds and whatnot. So we all survived, and we all flourished. All 3 of us flourished. So I think that's a real positive. Practitioners focus on helping clients develop a positive outlook on life and self-confidence. They maintain, promote, and enhance protective factors. They recall successful events in their lives. They identify resources. They view a mistake as a window of learning. They focus on the present and the future. And of course, um, my wife left for a reason, and I was part of that reason. I'm sure. I'm still not sure exactly what it was, but we viewed that whatever it was as something that we needed to change. So the next time I got married, I made sure that I didn't act the same way I did with my first wife. It's not like I'm certainly not an abusive person, but it turns out that that's one of the things that she didn't like about me was the fact that she thought I was wishy-washy. She kept going to getting involved with men that were a little bit more physically abusive than I was. I just wasn't directive enough. I'm not that person. There's something wrong with me. I can't hit people. Sorry. I feel so guilty now. Empowerment describes the process by which individuals, groups, and or communities take control of their circumstances to achieve their goals. Empowerment has an internal as well as an external component. The internal component of empowerment is also called psychological empowerment, control over motivations, cognitions, personality. Internal empowerment involves the belief that the individual will make competent decisions, solve their problems, achieve their goals, and have a significant impact on the environment. The external component of empowerment includes the tangible knowledge, competencies, skills, information, opportunities, and resources that allow a person to take action and actively advocate change. Empowerment, like resilience, is a process as well as an outcome. New competencies learned from experience leads to new feelings of empowerment. Research shows that the more involved an individual, the stronger the feeling of empowerment. The empowerment perspective allows clients to develop a sense of power and competency as they experience using their skills and knowledge in new and challenging ways. The empowerment perspective helps people discover their strengths, identify their goals, and develop a plan to reach their goals, allowing clients to accept responsibility for change and experience a greater sense of empowerment. The dual perspective views an individual as interacting and adapting to two surrounding systems or environments. The nurturing environment is composed of family, friends, and close associates at school or work. The sustaining environment consists of the people encountered in the wider community and broader society. While most European Americans experience nurturing and sustaining environments as fitting together, other ethnic and racial groups experience a poor fit between them. Individuals in the non-dominant group constantly evaluate disappointments in life to determine whether they are based on one's qualifications or on racism from the dominant culture. Minority members must develop a dual perspective, equating disappointments with the hostility of the broader society. Minority members must constantly shift between the home culture and the dominant culture to choose acceptable behavior in each situation. And this is kind of interesting. Started acting white, got a job the first week when he started acting white. And of course, this is if you talk right and you act right, if you act like a white person, then potentially, if you're African American, especially if you're an African American male, then potentially you will be able to find a job. We see this on television. Some of the announcers who are black, they don't sound black, and that's maybe why they were hired. They're one race, but they seem to act like the dominant culture, and that may be why they got their job. I'm trying to think of an African American announcer on television who's probably not acceptable to white society. And I'm thinking maybe Charles Barkley does NBA. Who's that other guy? Smith. He's kind of irritating. He's always yelling. And well, I'm not going to say that that has anything to do with being African American, but he doesn't smile a lot, and that bothers me a little bit. I want people to smile. then I think they don't dislike me. Anyway, and that's maybe that may be the dominant culture's problem. The dual perspective allows a practitioner to attempt to understand the structural barriers that those in other groups experience. This perspective makes the practitioner aware of the day-to-day challenges minority clients face. And of course, you need to be aware of this. And of course, that's what is happening here with McLovin. He calls people gangsta, and he's trying to incorporate his dominant culture with the black culture. Uh, and that's the end of that chapter, but we have another one to tackle. So let's go to chapter 3. As you can see, there's 35 slides, so that's how much longer we have to go. I have no idea why this picture's here, but we will find out. It's in the end of the chapter. Values are preferred conceptions of people, outcomes for people, ways of dealing with people. Personal values influence your view of the world, your personal and professional philosophies and choices, your view of how people change. Professional values often include principles of respect, self-determination, social justice, and professional integrity. Areas where personal values may conflict with professional values include religion, health, marriage and family, education, role of government, birth and death, and honesty. Ethical codes provide a brief explanation of what can be expected in the interactions between professionals and clients, as well as between professionals and other professionals. Ethical codes contain statements about what the professionals must and must not do. We have lots of ethical codes. We have ways that we have to deal with people, but we are a helping profession. Business doesn't. They don't have the same ethical codes that we have. Even though, I love Patrick to death, I recognize the fact that business people don't always do what's right. A good example is I got an email today from Pandora. I had signed up for Pandora because I don't have I have a cassette player in my pickup truck. I bought this. This is great. I bought this Dodge Dakota 4-wheel drive 1997 truck, almost in pristine condition. It had 30,000 miles on it. Okay. The problem is in 1997 they not only didn't have DVD players, but they had cassette players, and that's what I've got in my truck. So, and I don't have any cassettes. So I was going on a trip. I was carrying some furniture for one of my former students up to Duluth, Minnesota. Duluth, Minnesota, from Lost Nation, Iowa. And I had to travel that whole way without any entertainment, in essence. So as you're driving along, you know this, as you're driving along, you lose radio stations. So this was like the middle of Wisconsin. I had to drive all the way through Wisconsin, and there's hardly any radio stations. And what radio stations there are religious radio stations I really don't want to listen to. Anyway, so I tried to download Pandora so I could use Pandora to give me some entertainment. And being the not very bright person that I am, I couldn't figure out how Pandora worked. So they said, well, you can have Pandora for free, or you can subscribe to Pandora and not hear all the advertisements. So I did that. And I got an email today and said, if you don't cancel your Pandora uh, subscription, then we will charge you $54.97 every year, and we will automatically take this out of your credit card. So I decided, maybe I just need to, since I can't use it anyway, I don't know how to use it, then I need to get rid of it because I don't want to pay money for something I'm not using. Not only that, but they're going to take it out automatically. And, that's business ethics. We would never do something like that in psychology. Our ethics are stronger than that. Anyway, I wrote him a nasty note and said, and they told me how to get rid of it. And it was this page with all this small print, and they told you, well, you have to do this, then you have to do this, then you have to wait for this to happen, then you have to do this, and then you have to do this. And I was saying, this is so grotesquely confusing. I don't want this. I just want you to cancel my subscription. I don't want it. I didn't use it. I haven't done anything with it. And the nasty note kind of went someplace. And so they took care of it. It's all taken care of. I hope. I don't think they're going to charge me for it. But if we see Pandora coming out of my credit card, I'll tell my wife to watch for it, since I never get to see anything. I never even get to see my paychecks. My wife takes my paychecks. I have no idea how much money I'm making. Maybe she's got a secret account and she's going to run away with her boyfriend. Ethical codes contain statements about what the professionals must and must not do. And of course, I was talking about business. Sometimes business is not all that ethical. And as psychologists, we need to maintain our ethics, or we will lose our clients. People will not trust us anymore. Helping professions organizations, American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, this is their address. The American Counseling Association, the ACA, this is their website. The American Psychiatric Nurses Association, this is their website. And the American Psychological Association, I am a member of the APA. You can find their ethics code by going to this website. We're not done. The Association of Addiction Professionals, this is their website. The International Association of Marriage and Family Counselors, this is their website. The National Association of Social Workers, Manasseh, this is his website. Not his specifically, but he teaches social work for us. The National Organization of Human Services, this is their website. Professional competence includes practicing within the scope of competence based on education, training, professional credentials, and professional experience. So you should not be doing anything that you haven't been trained for. That's basically what this means. One of the most important aspects of professional competence requiring professional self-awareness is cultural competence. Cultural competence is defined as the application of cultural knowledge about individuals and groups to people to the groups of people to the standards, policies, attitudes, and practices of the helping process to result in better outcomes. This is the Code Talkers. They are Marines, as you can see. This guy has a Marine vest on. I think it says M. No, I don't know what it says. Anyway, this is a Marine. He's got 3 stars. Lieutenant General, a Marine Corps Lieutenant General, and he's talking to the Code Talkers. I thought I'd put that in there. What are we talking about? Cultural competency, and I'm sure he did a good job of dealing with these individuals. Since he's a Marine, he can talk like a Marine. He understands, and of course, they were Marines, so they have that connection between themselves and this individual, despite the fact that their war was World War II, and his war may have been Vietnam, or potentially it's not even. He's still got brown hair, so I'm guessing his war may have been Iraq and Afghanistan. Anyway, people who want to be culturally competent can be. This was just before these individuals were given the Medal of Freedom by Donald Trump, and of course Donald Trump tried to make political hay out of this interaction, and he was talking about what is her name, the lady from Massachusetts. He calls her Pocahontas. Anyway, he's using that, and one of these guys is standing up there, and they've got this really strange look on their face because they have no idea why he's doing this. And it's because he's not culturally competent. He doesn't care about anybody else's culture. He assumes everybody wants to be just like him. I'm talking about Donald Trump now. And if you like Donald Trump, I apologize. I found this really irritating. And of course, I'm not Dene, but I found it really insulting that he tried to make political hay off of the code talkers. He didn't seem to be very respectful of military people. He gave them lip service from time to time. But most of the time, he cut this and he cut that and he moved him here and he moved him there. He didn't really care what he was doing to people. He didn't seem to anyway. Anyway, that's my take on things. I didn't think he treated them very respectfully enough. These guys helped win World War II. Confidentiality is vital for information shared by the client with the therapist in the course of treatment. This information is not to be shared with others. Without confidentiality, clients are less likely to disclose sensitive information with the practitioner, and this can be a problem. If they're telling people information and then that information suddenly comes back to them, then they know that they can't trust the counselor, and this really hurts the entire profession. Why maintain confidentiality? The potential for clients to experience stigma, moral obligation for helping professionals to follow the ethical standards for a professional, model of acting with discretion and keeping one's word, legal requirements. We are legally required to not tell anybody about our clients, and if they tell us something in confidence, then we are not allowed. Theoretically, we're not allowed. We can only disclose this information if we are ordered to by a court of law. Otherwise, it is a secret. With the expansion of technology into all aspects of our lives, communication has become more and more difficult to regulate. We have cell phones, we have fax machines, we have answering machines, we have computers, we have internet sites. Limit sending confidential material on insecure lines. And this is one of the things that you have to think about. If any of this information leaks, and it can leak if you're not careful enough, then you lose the confidence that your clients have in you. Boundaries are defined as borders that separate some types of entities, for example, parents, children, systems, clients, service providers, and healthcare workers. These are the boundaries that we have to maintain. In all helping relationships, maintaining appropriate boundaries is an essential part of developing a trusting relationship with a client. Relationship boundaries must be maintained with delicacy. Not easy. When I was working in medicine, I worked in medicine for 30 years. When I was working in medicine, you had to know what you could say. You needed to be really careful. You can't get too friendly with the client or with the patient. In our case, we were talking about patients in the emergency room and the rest of the hospital. You needed to maintain your distance. You needed to maintain your boundaries. Sexual relationships with clients are forbidden by all professional codes and represent the most common ethical complaints against helping professionals. In one study, 7 to 8% of practitioners reported engaging in sexual intimacy with a client. If your idea is that you're looking for your what do they call it? Your life partner. If you're looking for a life partner, if you're looking for your philosophical balance in a mate, you're in the wrong profession. You just need to stay away from that whole idea. You cannot have, and certainly teachers, educators are not allowed to even think about that in that direction. Sexual boundaries. Sexual relationships can have a seriously negative effect on the client. It can cause cognitive dysfunction, identity and boundary disturbance, sexual confusion, rage and feelings of guilt, depression and emptiness, self-destructive feelings, increased risk of suicide. That's really not what you want. You don't want to hurt you don't want to hurt them. You want to help them, and you need to be careful. Once upon a time, I was counseling an individual. Well, this was I wasn't really dealing with this person, but this person was very seductive, and um, a colleague was trying to deal with her. He was a lot better looking and a lot younger than I was, and he came to me and he said, "Look, I can't deal with this. This lady is acting too seductively." And it was part of her pathology, and that's why what she was trying to do, she was trying to keep him at arm's length. And the way that she did that, the way that she needed to control the situation, and the way that she did that was by acting seductively toward the people that were supposed to be trying to help her, and allowed her to control the situation. So she was using her seductiveness as a control mechanism. So he asked me if I would take her on as a client. I started counseling her, and she tried the same thing with me, but it didn't work nearly as well with me. For one thing, she obviously wasn't attracted to me. I was a little bit older than than that would have worked, uh, and I don't know. We really didn't hit it off very well. Eventually, of course, she wanted to go back to the other counselor. I told her that can't happen because he was feeling intimidated by you. And so what we did, we found her a female counselor, and of course she didn't try to seduce the female counselor. It was a heterosexual seductiveness that she maintained, and actually that's what she needed all along. She needed somebody who she could interact with. And the problem was, and the reason that she used her seductiveness as a means of control was because she had been molested by her father. She had father issues, which, I was old. I don't know why I was so unattracted to her. Maybe I'm unattractive to everybody. Oh, I was laughing. Now I'm crying. But she had um, she had been molested as a child. She had father issues. Her father ignored her, and the only way that she could get him to pay attention to her was by being seductive. And of course, it was not an incestuous situation. It was just that he ignored her, and that was the only way he could get her. She could get his attention was by acting seductive. So she had learned to deal with men by being seductive, and sometimes usually that worked. Usually she was in control of the situation, and it never went too far. But she married a guy that was well. That's another story. Anyway, neither I nor the my colleague, my male colleague, were able to deal with her, and it was his wife, actually, the my male colleague's wife, uh, who was who was just as attractive as she was. She was strikingly attractive, and she knew it, and she used it. And when this other lady started talking to her, the first thing she said to her was, "Do you find that your uh, beauty is off-putting? That it blinds males? Uh, they can't deal with you on a realistic basis." And of course, that's exactly what her problem was, or that was part of her problem. Anyway, yeah, the two of them just hit it off, and they were able to work with each other. Touch, accepting gifts, and self-disclosure by professionals are behaviors that have the potential to be boundary violations depending on the circumstance. More damage can be done by overstepping boundaries than help previously given. There is a difference between city ethics and rural, small town reservation boundary ethics. It is easy for a city practitioner to gravitate in different circles than their clients. In smaller communities, it can be nearly impossible. A good example, how many counselors do you have on the Navajo Nation? Probably not that many. When I was working up in Montana, um, Blaine County had what, 7,000 people in it. There was one counselor. The probability, we had one counselor. She was a counseling social worker, and the poor thing, um, she wanted. She was relatively young. She was in her late 20s, early 30s. And, she wanted to date people, but she couldn't because the only people that she knew, most of the people that she knew were her clients. And even if they weren't clients, if she's around somebody, eventually they're going to come to her if they have any kind of problems at all. And it was really tough for her. But eventually she married one of her clients. As interesting as that is, and she stopped counseling, but it was later on, of course. But it's really tough. It's really tough in small town situations. The desire to help the people in the community that you are raised in is strong. When you know the client before trying to help them, you're maintaining a dual relationship, and you should try to avoid this. Never, ever, ever counsel one of your family members. This is unethical. It's known as a dual relationship. Never, ever, ever counsel one of your friends on a professional basis. That is a dual relationship. And like my friend from Montana, try not to marry your clients. That's probably something that you should never, ever, ever do unless you're in a situation like she was. Be aware that if you take on this task, you are possibly in ethical violation, and that's the biggest problem. Another challenge during your professional relationship is how much information about yourself you should disclose to the client. Self-disclosure should only be used in best interest of the client, certainly not the practitioner. And of course, if you're trying to fix yourself by talking to your client about yourself, then that's a boundary violation. That should never happen. After the dance is over, after the professional relationship is over, all ethical code strictures are removed. But a practitioner needs to be careful about how much contact they have with an old client to avoid damage due to confusion. The power differential remains. Seeing you out of the professional context may disclose vulnerabilities. It will be difficult to accept this client professionally in the future. And of course, this is what happened with my friend up in Montana. She fixed the guy, kind of. She did her best anyway. He was no longer her client, and they waited for about a year before they got married. But she kept seeing him in the bar. She's a big drinker. Most codes of ethics discuss the following ethical issues related to assessing clients. The assessment procedure or instrument should be within your scope of practice, education, and training. If you have never done it before, if you haven't been educated in that direction, if you've never been trained to use that system, then you shouldn't try it. Clients should be fully informed about the procedure and be included in the procedure in a collaborative way. Appropriate instruments or procedures should be selected based on the assessment question. Assessment instruments and procedures used should be standardized and include normative data appropriate for culturally diverse or disabled clients. When administering, scoring, and interpreting instruments, appropriate procedures should be adhered to. Clients should be given a clear and complete explanation of the assessment results. All test and interview data should be kept secure and released only to individuals who are competent in interpreting the data. Informed consent means full disclosure of the purposes, goals, techniques, and procedure rules for assessment and counseling approaches used. in language that is understandable to the client. If we talk about using a Jungian uh, type of counseling or a Freudian type of counseling, what you really need to do is explain to your client what that actually means. Legal violations are distinct from ethical violations. Ethical challenges are generally brought before a state licensing board, but can originate from a professional organization. Legal obligations to clients include duty to care, duty to respect privacy, duty to maintain confidentiality, duty to inform, duty to report, and duty to warn. So if you're ever taken in front of a board, this is what they're looking at. They're looking at the fact that you had a duty to do all these things, to care, to respect their privacy, to maintain confidentiality, to tell them what you're doing, to report to them or to others what you're doing, and if there is a danger to them, you need to warn them. Legal limits to confidentiality. Confidentiality is not absolute. Laws vary by state depending on where you are. It is important to keep up to date in your own state laws concerning confidentiality requirements and expectations. And of course, I do not counsel in either Arizona or New Mexico or Colorado. Actually, I don't have a counseling license now. So if you're planning on doing your counseling in Colorado, New Mexico, or Arizona, what you need to do is make sure that you understand the laws of that place. It's not like you can go from one place to another and the laws are going to be exactly the same. I've had this argument over and over again. People from California have far more strictures than people in other areas. In Montana, a counselor can prescribe medication. In California, only a doctor can prescribe medication. And of course, you get into these arguments from time to time. It all depends on where you are. And when you tell them that, hey, in Montana we can prescribe medication, they look at you like you're, some kind of a toothless moron or something. Malpractice is defined as negligence in which a professional fails to follow generally accepted standards of the profession, resulting in injury to the client. And of course, all these laws have to do with each state that you're in. The client must prove four things about the practitioner to recover damages. The practitioner owed the client a duty to conform to a particular standard of conduct. The practitioner had an obligation to follow defined standards of care. The practitioner breached the duty by some act of omission or commission in the professional practice. In other words, they didn't give them something, or they gave them something that hurt them, and that's why they were damaged. The client or others suffered measurable damage or injury. The practitioner's conduct was the direct or proximate cause of the damage. The top 5 reasons for malpractice of practitioners in the United States are incorrect treatment, sexual impropriety, breach of confidence, failure to diagnose or incorrect diagnosis, suicide of the patient. So the main reason is because of incorrect treatment. But sexual impropriety is number 2. This is actually a counselor who was arrested in Belfast, Maine. I've never been up there. Waldo County. How tall is he? 66 inches. So that's what? 5 feet is 60. So he's 5.5 feet tall. He's the same height as I am. I'm 5'6". But I don't have a beard. I'm not that ugly. If a practitioner loses, maybe he's not as ugly as I was saying. If a practitioner loses in court, there may be several consequences. They might be fined for damages, punitive damages. They need to give them or fine them further counseling. They may lose their license. They may lose their reputation, of course. Future difficulties in obtaining malpractice insurance. The court case, whether won or lost, might damage the practitioner financially, emotionally, or professionally. And this is another counselor, and as you can see, he's quite distraught. Adhere to up-to-date practice methods, good documentation of practices, maintain of appropriate boundaries with your clients, no multiple relationships. The following activities may lead to malpractice. Sexual relationship with the client is number one. Practicing beyond your scope of competency. Fraudulent billing, violation of reporting laws, breach of confidentiality, or refusal to provide records. This is big. Some people get into counseling because they want to make money. They need a new swimming pool, so they start billing their clients fraudulently. It's really kind of silly. Um, we're here to help. That's why we're here. We're not here to make money. We're not here to find our soulmate. I was trying to think of soulmate before. I couldn't think of it. Anyway, ethical dilemmas involve making a choice between two or more relevant but contradictory ethical directives where every alternative results in some type of undesirable outcome for one or more persons. Damned if you do no matter which you pick. And of course, that happens. That happens a lot in life. Sometimes there are no good alternatives. There's only bad alternatives. Reamer in 1995 describes two principles that can guide practitioners in resolving ethical dilemmas. And this is Reamer. Beneficence, where the practitioners should take action intended to help or benefit others. Non-malfeasance, where the practitioner should act without malice in order to do no harm. And this is really tough. As a medical person, this is what we live by, is do no harm. Maybe you didn't help the patient, but at least you didn't hurt the patient. And of course, that's the best that you can do sometimes. Elaine Congress, a social worker, came up with the ethic model of decision making in 2000. Examine all the relevant client, personal, agency, professional, and societal values, including personal, societal, cultural, agency, client, and professional values. Think about the ethical standards of your professional code of ethics and relevant laws. Hypothesize about all the possible consequences of different decisions. Identify all who might benefit and all who might be harmed. It is often necessary to research potential consequences of possible decisions on all those involved. Consult with supervisors and colleagues as you begin to formulate choices. When a supervisor, colleague, or consultant is involved, the final decision must take their thoughts into consideration. And that is the ethical decision making. And that is the end of the chapter. You always need to think about ethics. This is not the easiest thing in the world. Anytime you're dealing with a client, you need to deal with them ethically. If you're not, then potentially you're in violation of your ethical standards. As somebody who lives on the Navajo Nation, if you're dealing with a clan member, a family member, or a clan member, that's probably, if you can, you need to hand them off to somebody else because that is a dual relationship. And you need to stay away from that if you possibly can, as interesting as that is. So you have different situations on the reservation. Since white people and people who are non-native don't have these relationships, then this is something that they don't talk about. But this is something that you need to think about. I certainly don't have a right to talk to you about how whether you can interact with these people or not. I'm not sure if you have a healer in your family, if you have a roadman, can they do a ceremony for you? I'm not exactly sure. Somebody might answer that question in the comments. I think there's a discussion question. So if anybody has the answer to that, is that ethical? Give me that answer, and then I can tell my students in the future that that's something they need to stay away from. Well, that's something that isn't done in traditional practices and ceremonies. So we'll see. Please give me that information. And that is the end of the chapter, so I will stop.